that's where a lot of people like got their outrage, were like these viral videos, these viral moments. And I'll just say it's unfortunate that there are so many at the time there were so many opinions about a culture that a lot of people didn't even have connections to, but they had these definitive opinions.
After leaving the corporate 9-to-5 grind, I became the boss of my own spiritual business, helping others explore and navigate the human experience from insight, wisdom, and lessons learned along the way. Today, I help aspiring spiritual entrepreneurs gain the confidence to share their gifts with the world. Welcome to the Happy Healing Shop podcast. I'm your host, Trang Pham Nguyen, and each week we'll dive into incredible stories of strength, resilience, and transformation. So, if you are ready for some serious breakthroughs, laughs and tears, and stories that will inspire you, you are in the right place, my friend. Let's get started. Hey, Sam, thanks for joining me. I'm so excited for everyone to meet you because I think my friends have all heard about you, especially when we met a couple years ago. And then it was during the pandemic. And then we just hung out since you live like 30 feet away from me.
Yeah.
And one day, I don't know how it started, but I was like, either I said it or you were thinking about trying to revamp your apartment. And I said, can I just take over? And yeah, actually not take over, but can I decorate? And you're like,
Well,
yeah.
kind
And
of took over.
yeah. And then when you were at work, I just started decorating away, and every day you'd come and it turned into eventually a nice lounge. And that is how our friendship kind of, I guess, started off. And then we just hung out.
Yeah, it looked like an actual adult lived there after you finished with it.
And then, so we started having conversations because normally I would cook dinner and be like, yo, I have a lot of food. Can I come over? Do you want some? And then can I also use your TV to watch stuff? Because I literally didn't have anything. I just had my laptop. I had like no service, no subscriptions or that kind of stuff. And then over time, we would have deep talk conversations about life. And I loved your perspective on things and the insight you brought. And just even growing up as a Black male in LA, or in America, and just gave me a lot of insight to things. And also I found that your upbringing, there's some stories where I went, whoa. And I think it's worthy of sharing for other people to kind of hear how you lived, and just get different perspectives. So I guess you can start off with, not when you were a baby, we can just start off with like how you kind of, I guess in a way, your upbringing and work from there.
Yeah, definitely. And let me just say, when I first met you, I think I asked you, "Hey, you want to grab lunch or something?" We saw each other in passing like 2 or 3 times, not a lot because we would be just different time zones, obviously, even though we were like just a flight of stairs away. But after we hung out a few times, I was like, "Oh yeah, she's cool. Like, I'm glad I met her, and here we are." But we'll get into that. But yeah, basically, I've grown up in LA. Mostly the South Bay area, which is like basically Inglewood, Hawthorne, and grew up kind of uh I feel like it was a unique experience because we grew up super religious. My family was a major fixture in a small church from the time I was born. So we grew up in a really close-knit community. I grew up with a couple of brothers, an older and a younger one, an older sister as well. So, and we were all like 1 or 2 years apart from each other. So I don't know. I felt kind of isolated from the rest of the community, and I didn't realize that until we got a little older and we started going to like middle school and high school, and it kind of hits you like, oh, we were a bit sheltered, and there were pros and cons from it. I appreciated it because they really, growing up in a church like that, it taught us to be respectful. It gave us a belief. We grew up with an ideal way of living, and even though financially everything wasn't there, so it became that's why I brought up middle school, because that's when it became evident, when you started to see, oh, like we're a little different, like than the rest of these kids. Just our mindset, it was kind of like a culture shock, you know. um
Would you say when you said you noticed that you were different, was it the way the other kids spoke, what they spoke about, or more like their perspective on things? How did you know?
it was honestly, it felt like everything. It was, and I will say my siblings adjusted. I feel like a couple of them, all of them probably adjusted a little better than I did. I don't know why that is. Probably a conversation for a different day. But yeah, the way they spoke, super vulgar. I wasn't vulgar at all or anything like that. The way they dressed, we weren't hip to any of the styles that were going on, any of the lingo. So yeah, it was culture shock at a young age. And this isn't even taken into consideration the area we grew up in. Like the schools we went to weren't necessarily the best funded, but you don't know that. You don't know that while you're growing up in it. And that was the thing. But yeah, that's how we grew up. And the older I got, like once I started getting towards like high school age and I started noticing even more differences, it started to make me feel like I wanted out of that life, as much as I cherished like our church community at the time. The older I got, the more I started to see it, even even amongst the religious community, it felt a little strict. It felt like we were sheltered more than most when we would travel to different churches, meet different people, and they would come to our church and point things out to us like, hey, that's a little strange. And no disrespect in case anyone sees this. I'm still cool with people who go there, but I started to realize it wasn't for us. And you know how you start questioning things, like, hey, why does the
I
pastor
was
have
about to
this?
say,
Yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say like when I guess like was it something over time or like a certain event that happened where you started questioning your, I guess like I would say identity, but more so of like, is this what I want or what is it that what is Sam? What do I believe in? Not what was taught to me.
To be honest, there were a lot of red flags, like that didn't have anything to do with me, but I would see other people going through it. And some people would leave the church and I'll be like, hey, they were kind of a main fixture here. Why did they leave? And even like a couple of siblings would start having issues, but it wasn't close to home, it wasn't hitting me directly. So I was a little selfish in that area. It wasn't until I had like a relationship. I had a girlfriend at the church, and I felt like both my family and the church were being way too intrusive about things, asking about personal details about our relationship. And that's when it hit me, when our relationship kind of fell apart. And at this time, I'm a young adult. I'm like 19, 20 at this time. And that's when things hit that close to home, you can't ignore it. And I questioned everything after that. I started asking my parents why they would let certain things slide, and it got to a point where I had to get out of there. I had to experience more in life. I had to grow like as an individual, and I did. I left, and one by one, all of my family kind of departed from the church. And I will say, looking back on things, I wish I handled them a little differently. When you're that age, you're kind of well, I'll speak for myself. I was a little like, whoa, well, I'm gonna switch things up. We're not accepting these answers anymore. And just to give a little, I kind of struggle with how much detail I should give in saying this, but just to give like some perspective, it would be like super personal stuff, like how intimate have you guys been, because this type of stuff can affect the church and its finances. And it was really like the church at the time, I felt like they focused a lot on finance and prosperity and how your life can affect that, and they will use scripture to kind of back how certain things can affect the whole community, and it felt like an excuse to kind of like
Intrude.
intrude. Exactly, yeah. So
Did you um when you decide to leave, I guess leave a church or go on your own and be the first in your family to do so, did you get a lot of backlash or did you feel shame and guilt?
I should say I wasn't the first to actually leave. My sister and my older brother both left, but it was before that. But this one, when I left, I felt like it tied a bunch of people into it because when I left, I was kind of dragging everyone with me. I kind of made it like a big deal about it, and it was dramatic.
Like the big exodus.
Yeah, not a lot of people, but just like it's kind of affected the rest of the family there because I was really asking like questions to them as well. I did feel guilty a little bit because I didn't handle, like I said, I didn't handle things the best way. But in hindsight, I'm kind of glad it happened, and I wish it happened earlier because I feel like people can lose their identities in communities like that, and especially at a young age where you're not even developed yet and you're trying to conform to this certain way of being, and you don't even know yourself. So um yeah, I'm glad it happened. But at the same time, I felt like it stunted my growth. Like once I reached high school, I felt so out of place because I was so committed and dedicated to the church at the time. I didn't really know how to conform at that point to, to the public life. And we were going to some tough schools in the area. Some of I was going to Lusinger High School in Lawndale, and that school was having riots like at least 2 or 3 times a year. And I didn't know how to handle it, to be completely honest. So my parents would start pulling me out of that school, putting me in these small, talking 100 people, 100 students going there because they saw I wasn't really excelling like in education because I was distracted. Um, yeah, so that was kind of the biggest adjustment. Like once leaving the church, I know I'm kind of mixing up timelines, but it started like my not disdain, but my different way of thinking started to really take place like my senior year of high school, and it kind of led up to that point, and that was just the tipping point, if that makes sense.
Do you have any what advice would you give to someone that is going through something like that where they're part of, doesn't have to be a religious organization, just part of a community, but they're starting to kind of pick up on things around them that maybe things aren't what it seems? What, any advice you'd give to them?
I would say try to find an activity or a community outside of that church that can kind of take you away from it, where it can be like a natural. And for a lot of people, that's school, that's going to college and getting away from the family, and education wasn't really a priority with my family. So it wasn't even on my mind, like just going to college and getting away from the family, unfortunately. But I know a lot of young people are kind of disillusioned with school nowadays because of the cost of it and whatnot. But the benefits of it are sometimes it creates a necessary distance that you need from your family, and that's the advice I would give. Like take advantage of that. Take advantage of the distance and build like relationships outside of the community you grew up in, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. Because like growing up with Asian parents that are a bit more on the strict side. But when I went to college, I just felt free because, and there was like you said, physical distance. So I was about an hour and a half away from them driving. So there was you can't check up on me. I can do my own thing
Yeah,
and stuff
yeah.
like that. And then you start to meet new people and then you start to see how they think and you kind of pull from what at that age, you might kind of go along with the crowd in certain points, but then eventually you kind of develop like, hey, this is actually, we did this before and I kind of don't know if I like it. So, so yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And just having that in a way of forced physical boundary
Exactly.
helps, does wonders.
Yeah.
And then, now, can we fast forward to, I guess, the next chapter of your life, or even the part where you decide to try to be independent on your own from family?
Yeah. So after that, I was working at the time that happened. I was working at Northrop Grumman, just like as a driver, delivery driver, going across to the different buildings in Redondo Beach. And after I lost that job, I had no school and no education at the time, so I had no idea what I was going to do. My brother helped me out. He got me a job as like a job coach, where you're help working with mentally disabled men and you're taking them to job sites. In hindsight, not the best job. They didn't treat the citizens the best, but um I was kind of, even at that age, I was kind of drawn to that work. Uh, just mental health work in general. So when I had the opportunity just to get my foot in the door at an organization like Kaiser Hospital, I did it. And that was like janitorial work, but I just wanted to get my foot in the door because I had a friend who had worked there and kind of worked his way up. So sure enough, I did that. Within a year or two, I was working in the call center, and then somehow ended up in optometry, and I'm teaching people how to wear contact lenses, and had no idea how I got there. But financially, I'm struggling, and my parents, I'm still staying with my parents, but they're still, um, and when I talk about them, I never want to come off disrespectful, because I know they were doing what they knew, but they were hovering. It felt like they were hovering heavy on me. So
Was it overbearing?
it was overbearing. It was, when you take into account that I had a late start on everything. So I wasn't going to parties when I was like 19, 20. I wasn't drinking or smoking or anything. I didn't get any of the life experiences that some people have to get out of their system, not everyone, but some people. And I felt like I needed that. I needed to kind of live a little bit, So I my objective was just to get out of there. So at the time, I started staying with a close friend of mine. He had like access to a house that his stepmom had kind of left to him, and we were just staying there. We were working at Kaiser, coming there. We were living kind of recklessly at that time, but I felt like I was catching up, and um, but at the same time, I um I wasn't really building for myself. I wasn't saving or anything. I was just, hey, we got a house we can stay in and chill. Like, we were in Willing Hills at the time, two young dudes. And then the owners of that house, they were living in Seattle at the time, so they came back. And I did not have enough saved up for an apartment or anything. So I was kind of out on my ass after that. But there was no way I was going back home. I wanted to be able to come home and like have a drink or smoke at the time. And so I stayed in my car. I was living in my vehicle for some months. I had like a membership to 24-hour fitness, and I would go in there, work out, shower, sleep in my car, go to work. I was working in optometry. No one had any idea like how I was living, but it did hit me at that time like, this is unsustainable. So I started saving, and kind of locked in and stopped going out, stopped partying at the time, and um, saved up enough to get a spot in North Hollywood over here. And that's what kind of led me to you in that area. I feel like that's a condensed timeline for sure, but that's basically how I got there at that point.
Yeah. And then I don't think I remember listening to another podcast and they were saying how majority of homeless people aren't the people that you see in the streets. A lot of them are actually people that try to make ends meet and they live in their car. And so I remember when you told me that story and you said, yeah, I was homeless for a while before I just moved to this apartment. This apartment that you're in is like your first, kind of feels like my first independent
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
you know? And I think like a lot of people uh or can be in that situation where they they can't financially make it. So they will move in with the parents, but the parents are you can tell with their energy or just being like, oh, I really don't want to go back, but I feel like I financially have no choice. Do you feel like you have any words of advice to someone going through that from your perspective, I guess, and how you kind of made that decision?
man. I don't know. It's so tough. It's so different for everyone, man. I just know that even when my family, we grew up in humble beginnings. Like it wasn't, it wasn't the first time I was homeless. We were homeless like as a family a couple of times before. Luckily, we had my dad had brothers who let us stay with us and say humble beginnings. People usually say that when they've kind of made it. Like I should say like humble beginnings and humble midlife, humble current life, you know. No, I'm just playing. But it was it was humble beginnings though, because um that was one of the reasons I wanted to leave, because I felt like yo, if I'm paying this, if I'm helping this with the family, which probably is the incorrect mindset. um I see other cultures whose family, they stay with each other and they build with each other, but it's like at what cost? I felt like I had no room to grow as an individual at the time, and um I feel like the same advice would apply. I I tried to talk to my parents back then, and the communication wasn't exactly open. And for those people who kind of experienced that, you just have to be really on point and responsible at a young age to where you can kind of find independence where you don't have to depend on that. And that's easier said than done, but it is possible. A lot of people do it, and I wish I was able to do that, but at the same time, I don't regret it. I met certain people because of the path that I took and that I'm currently on. So yeah, man, if you're going through that, I just recommend that you you stay financially responsible as early as possible, so you don't have to depend on that, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Uh,
And then now you got into healthcare, from janitor to like a janitor at Kaiser, and then now you're working way up. Go Sam.
yeah.
But what made you, did you always know you want to work in the mental health industry, or did it kind of eventually form over time?
It formed over time. It was I luckily I got into Kaiser and I started networking and meeting a lot of different people. So I was lucky enough to work in a few different departments. And I would say probably during the pandemic, so recently, I I was networking, I was reaching out to different department heads, asking, because I had a little bit of a name within that building. So just offering, hey, if you guys need help, I'm experienced here, here, and here. And I had one department administrator reach back to me, and she knew a mentor of mine at the time. And I was able to work there temporarily while during the pandemic they had like a work pool where they had to kind of redirect certain people to fill like ER and urgent care. So the non-essential departments like optometry, which I was working in, I was considered kind of non-essential during the pandemic. So I took that as an opportunity to reach out and kind of work in mental health depression care, and I loved it. I loved being able to kind of take some of the skills I learned just in the call center and optometry, and just you know using your communication skills. And and I was going through like mental health struggles at the time for myself, so I was kind of even more drawn to it. And yeah, I loved it for 6 months. I think you remember that time period because I thought for sure there was a coordinator position that I had in the bag. I got a little overconfident. Didn't end up getting it, but after that I was looking for that position and I got lucky. I did leave optometry after that to go work in the Kaiser lab because I felt like I was losing some joy. I was starting to hate where I worked. I was starting to hate speaking with patients every day. And I didn't want to become that person who was taking it out on patients because I didn't like where I was at.
Yeah.
I think everyone's experienced that where they get like a shitty worker. And is there like a
Yep.
language? Is there
No, you're
what you
good.
okay, okay. Um yeah, and I didn't want to become that. So I left. I went to an isolated lab, no patients. It was like a returns coordinator position. You're managing all of the returns across Southern California. But man, I started missing like the socializing
Human
part of it.
interaction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
I remember
interaction.
at that point, I remember, okay, this is just a side perk that you had, but when they were throwing out the glass frames, like frames for
Yeah,
glasses
yeah,
out,
yeah,
and you're like, they're selling them for $20 only. These are like all type of brands, including
yeah,
Gucci and all that stuff. I remember being like, Sam, bring a bunch of them home for me so I can take a look at them. That was funny. That was a
yeah.
great perk. Anyways,
It
continue.
really was. I do miss that actually. But um yeah, I should mention too, at the time I was exploring opportunities outside of Kaiser. I started podcasting with my brother. So I wasn't really, I had like Kaiser on the back burner, but I, w- I was trying to see if I could branch out and start my own thing, what at the same time keeping myself funded because there's no going back to living in the Passat, you know. But I I stayed there. I ended up jumping to a couple of different positions within the lab and boom, this support coordinator position for a brand new department at Kaiser. It was basically a problem solving therapy department where it kind of manages patients dealing with lower levels of anxiety and depression. And man, it felt like the universe just lining things up because those were two things that I was heavily in therapy for, you know. I should mention, not to get too off track, but right when I got like my benefits, because I had never had health benefits before I started working at a hospital, therapy was one of the first things I signed up for, you know. It was uh I know a lot of different communities when therapy was had kind of first started, it was kind of frowned upon. And that was with my family and my community as well. But it I never understood it, even at the time. Um, I remember even when I was staying with my parents, I was actually kind of doing therapy on the side, like without them knowing, because I didn't want any ridicule for doing it, which is crazy to say. Um, but yeah, so I had always had an affinity towards mental health because I hated that there were people going through things that weren't able to speak with their support system about it, to be honest. And so yeah, I was really grateful that this department opened up. I applied for it. Luckily at the time, Kaiser is all about seniority.
Actually, I have a question.
Mm.
So, I know you're not a spokesperson for all Black people, but I guess from your understanding of how you grew up, or even growing up in a Black family, or what you've seen, how do they view mental health? So, for example, for Asians, at least like my parents, their generation, they're immigrants, refugees, um, and they all have a lot of trauma from trying to escape the war, or just that kind of stuff. But I think therapy or even mental health is not a thing we talk about. It kind of doesn't exist. Or I think for some people, it might be shameful or awkward or shameful to be like, yeah, my kid has autism, or there's something. It's just more of like what they'll say is like, I think what someone else might say is like, oh yeah, that kid in that family is a bit weird, and that's how they would say it. So Or even like, like you're depressed, I escaped Vietnam and all did,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
for you, what was that like?
Um, well, to be honest, I had kind of already known they would mention things here or there. Like if we're watching a movie or a TV show and the idea of therapy comes up, or anything having to do with mental health, they would do like the loony,
Yeah.
yeah,
The
and
crazy sign.
the crazy sign, and it's so bad. Like you pick up on things like that. You pick up on how your family reacts to, even to different cultures. Like you can see how they react to different races or people with a different sexual orientation. Like I would see that as a kid, and some I would pick up on it and I would adapt that at the time. And some I would be like, yo, but I'm kind of going through that. And so I guess I gotta chill on expressing that to them. And I'll never forget one day I was taking, I'm not a big medication person, but at the time, I just mean for me, like with mental health. But I have taken some before, to deal with depression. But I remember one time I left my medication on the table, like at my parents' house, and I started freaking out. Like, and I called my younger brother, like, hey, can you pull that off the table? Like I had already been going back and forth with my parents on religion and just different possibilities, for a different belief system. And I felt like I was hitting a wall with that. So the last thing I wanted to do was have like conversations about like mental health, and um it's unfortunate. And I'll say even to this day, it's not something that they completely understand. But I think over time, hopefully, like as they see me grow in this field, they'll become more open to it. And yeah, that's kind of been my history with it. And I've just been lucky enough to kind of have like really good support systems both at work and like my friends who have an understanding of like the importance of mental health. Yeah.
Do you feel like being a male as well, you've grown up with a lot of stigma with men needing to get mental health help?
You mean as far as like just like being a
You know
man?
how,
Okay.
yeah, going to see therapy and stuff like that. Like, oh, I'm Sam, happen to be male, but I go see therapy. Whereas like for females, I feel like with my female friends, there's more like openness of going towards it, or it's very common. But so I wonder for you as a male, did you feel like any like you're afraid of what people might think of you, or as a man, or you just were like, screw it, I just feel like I need to do it and I'm gonna do it on my own?
That's a good question. Not really as a man, mostly because one of my reasons for going to therapy was to kind of better my ability to have successful relationships. At that point, I had already had like three failed relationships with young women, and I was trying to figure it out. So I was I was doing it for in part for the ladies. Like I was trying I was trying to be I was trying to like work my shit out so that I wouldn't keep taking things into to relationships like I was. So yeah, but I understand that though. And I think that was like a big part of me not revealing it to my family yet. Or not being comfortable like expressing some of that to my family. But I had like really, really cool like male friends. You've met a couple of them, and they are really open-minded individuals. And without that, man, who knows? I might have avoided it altogether. But just knowing that I had like uh, a community that didn't reject it, like I feel really lucky in that. So yeah. Um, but I will say I my friends, even though they were open to it, open to the idea, like they weren't like judgmental towards it. It's kind of like a different story. Um, like trying to convince them to go. Like not everyone thinks they need it, and not everyone does, you know. But as a friend, sometimes you could see like, oh, but you could benefit from it though, you know, like
I always find that sometimes the people that say, I don't need therapy are the ones that do.
right, right, for real.
Because they're maybe not aware. Was when when you're a friend of the outsider, you're like, you kind of, like you said, beautifully put it. That's what I like about you. You're very tactful. Is you could benefit from it.
You could benefit from
You
it. That
could benefit.
situation you keep bringing up, you should kind of take that to therapy, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Have you thought about talking to a professional about this?
Right.
Because I'm not qualified. So
One of the benefits from being in the church life was you didn't really focus too much on race or or anything like that. Like I grew up kind of oblivious that we were black, and that might be in part because my whole community was black, and all the schools I went to were black. Um, so even though there was a difference in worlds, like it would be culture shock in that extent. Like didn't grow up thinking like, oh well, black people have been through this, like in this country, and in a way, I think it both helped and hurt, to be honest. Like, because like once I finally started seeing like, oh, people care about this. This is like a big deal in this country. Like I felt behind and a little naive in the situation. But at the same time, it allowed me to go into relationships and friendships without overthinking, like, what are they gonna think about me? Are how are we different? Like you immediately look for like connections, and I think that really came to light like during the pandemic. And I know that was fairly recent, but I was kind of naive to a lot of things until that point. Um and that's when it started to hit me like, well, I started to see, a lot of people became a little more comfortable with speaking about matters of race and the race differences within the country. I'll never forget when I was at work, and I'm a pretty friendly person. So
I guess.
I just meaning like I talk to anybody no matter what. Aaron, one of the Aaron's that you met gave me a hard time about that. He's like, bro, you just can't befriend everyone, and which is true to a certain extent, but I like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. But people will get so comfortable with you like during that time. And at work, that's not a place where I like to talk about like race or religion or politics or anything like that. But people will be so comfortable and bring up their thoughts about like BLM and this and that. And at the time I had no opinion of anything. Like I'm not really a political person, but it became like it was shocking to me how comfortable some people were like bringing up their opinions just because they thought like I was an approachable black person, and that's when I started to care about it a little bit, and it made me like reevaluate like, wow, how have I been this naive to like racial interactions throughout my life? And in part I think is because of like how sheltered I was, and I think I'm just bringing that up to say there are benefits to educating like your youngsters about the differences without making them like self-conscious about it, and um but yeah, that's and during the pandemic, I became a little obsessed with it. And I remember talking to you a little bit because your family, you start talking to your family and you start seeing, oh, we view this differently. And I know this isn't unique to me. I know this happened to a lot of families during that time. And uh, and it made me want to get offline, not to jump around too much, but that's where it led me. A lot of the discussions about race, like with your friends and your family, it kind of takes you online to see what like the temperature is, like what are people saying about this. And that's where a lot of people like got their outrage, were like these viral videos, these viral moments. And I'll just say it's unfortunate that there are so many at the time there were so many opinions about a culture that a lot of people didn't even have connections to, but they had these definitive opinions about like a whole community, and based on media fatigue, based on a lot of different things. But it's hard not to start taking a lot of that personal, like as a Black man, as a Black person. And and that's when I really started to kind of evaluate like my place in society, if that makes sense. Uh and it started to I started to become a little jaded after that, and a little defensive. And I didn't like that, because I wasn't even educated on it myself. And I would see the same conversations happening over and over about how a certain community should be policed. Well, they're policed this way because they act this way. And it always leads down the same path. And then it's like, well, they act this way because of this. And you find yourself trying to defend, um you find yourself being the spokesperson trying to defend, well, we're not inherently violent, we're not inherently this, even though numbers suggest differently. But the numbers always lack context. There's always a lack of context. And it just became so repetitive, to the point where you're like, oh man, I don't even want to talk about this anymore. And
Yeah, it's really heavy.
yeah, it's heavy and it's nuanced. And the internet is, Twitter and IG and TikTok is not a place to have like a nuanced conversation about it, because there's a lot that goes into it, and it's not as simple as like these like dunked on comments make it out to be.
I
And
remember one of the things I liked talking to you about this was because I felt like it was very comfortable, because we're both pretty chill when we talk to each other for like
yeah,
hours and stuff like that. And I remember asking once, like, what do you think Black people want, or what would help them? I know you're not the official like spokesperson for whole entire like the Black race and stuff like that, but I remember at that time people were posting Black squares, on Instagram. I
yeah.
remember thinking, what actually would help and kind of move the needle forward? And then you were telling me reparations, and I remember saying like, what's that? And they explained it to me on go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, so with reparations. And I remember thinking, okay, and I guess, like, how would you describe in your way of what reparations is, to someone that's just listening in being like, I've never heard of this before?
Well, that's actually something that I think is on like the ballot in California. Like they're really pushing towards that. I My perspective has kind of changed since then. To be honest, I kind of ejected myself like from the talk altogether. I know, and that hopefully that doesn't sound irresponsible, but I don't. Reparations is basically, given the funding to the African American communities who were affected from slavery and everything that came after slavery, from Jim Crow to redlining, where you lost out on the possibility of building generational wealth, which I think that stuff does matter. And at the same time, I don't really like where the discourse around like around like African American relations has gone, because it feel I don't know about you, but it feels like the media has kind of taken it and just made it all about profit, because they just want to drive like this tension. And I hate that. I hate that part about it. Because like when you talk about things like reparations, I hear different talks about there are other communities who have suffered atrocities and they've been able to rebound, as a people, as a community. And you get into like this ugly space where you start like comparing atrocities. And I never want to do that, man. I never want to get into that.
Yeah.
I just know, that there is a market for the black versus white, unlike anything else like in America. Like nothing else picks up traction like that. And so I kind of try to avoid that because it's a really deep talk. Like it's a heavy conversation. So like my issue with friends and channels like talking about this type of stuff is like, hey, you guys are talking about something that you have no knowledge of. Like a lot of, and I don't say this like to shame people who don't have black friends, who don't have black people in their lives, but it's like, man, people have really strong opinions about like what the black community should and shouldn't be doing without any real connection to them, and I guess something like that should be followed with advice. I, I just think maybe like really educating yourself. I'll never forget when I went to one of the rallies, because I was all in during that time. I went to a rally. I was like the only black person out there. No one was talking to me. And it was like, it feels like this is about black people, but at the same time, I feel completely uninvolved at the same time, because like it doesn't even feel like like we're the main voices in this. It feels like this is like, it felt like white people arguing with other white people about like what black people should get and shouldn't get, or and it's exhausting. These topics are better served with long form conversations and like and real deep research about it. That otherwise the talking point, it just feels like a talking point. Um,
Right. I try to think of you, 'cause you played, well, obviously you played Mortal Kombat, right? Before and
yeah.
stuff like that. And I remember thinking, how do I explain, with minorities or being a female or in a workplace or just in America, I'm sure in other parts of the world too. But how do you explain to someone who's privileged to understand that they have privilege? And video games, I was thinking this might help people understand more, but it's like, let's say you choose Liu Kang as your character and I'll choose Sub-Zero, as the character when we're playing each other. But it's kind of like, how you can play with handicap, like life handicap in the game. So you like, let's say like, oh, I get 75% life and like the computer gets 100% life, something like that, right? But, you know, everyone else is kind of like people that are privileged don't see the handicap life at all. And you're like, dude, bro, I'm playing with this handicap life. So yes, I can win this game against the computer, but it's going to be so much tougher just because I already have only 75% life, or even some cases 50% life. And I start off that way. And it's really more of leveling the playing field um, to make it fair in a way. But I think the frustrating part is that you're the only one that sees that you're handicapped, and other people that are watching in, that are privileged, they don't see that there's a handicap. They just think, oh, everything's fair and square. So that's how I was thinking of explaining it in a very simple term. Like there's so much more, there's so many layers to it, but in a way where people can understand, like, oh, I can see how there's a handicap and how it hinders a lot of people. Like, yes, you can still excel in life. Yes, you can still get to the top of the chain and everything, but it is just so much harder to get there.
And it's like that's a good comparison, and it's like pretty simple to understand, right? And you understand that there are exceptions where people can persevere and get through, and there's the exception that there are people um who aren't minorities, who grew up like without privilege. Like we understand that, but just on like a percentage level, like minorities more than often are the ones growing up without that privilege. And for the longest it feels like you're just trying to get them to at least understand that. But and I feel like people who don't understand, they don't want to, their mind is made up already in that instant. And it feels like I don't know. Doesn't it sometimes feel like you're having the same conversation over and over, and they're unwilling to say, well, there are some instances that may have had us a little more privileged, you know. They're unwilling to even say that. So it's just like, all right, what's the point of trying to explain this anymore, you know? Like, but you don't want to lose faith at the same
Like,
time. Yeah.
I do think, yeah, I think the world's, it is getting better at a much slower rate than we'd like to. Um, because, in terms of, and maybe I'm not the one to say this, but like, for example, like 100 years ago, human rights were a lot different too. Like women couldn't vote and there's just different things, but obviously, and even back then, gay people, no gay person could get married, and here we're making progress. It's really slow, especially for people that want to see that are more like progressive. But I do think the world's getting better. And I think with the newer generation, the younger generation stuff, there's always like a shift in the energy, right? So you know how like now we see the older generations and like our parents and we're like, wow, you are so old school. But then probably when we're their age, the younger
Right.
generations could be like, wow, Sam and Trang, you're so old school.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's coming, but that's why I also have faith and I have a lot of hope in like I'm optimistic about it. I just know that there's gonna a lot of conversations gonna be had, possibly more fights, hopefully not that, but change is happening.
That's good perspective too. It's like a reminder to focus on the positives that we have come through and not focus on like the rhetoric that continues. Like, and I I used to take it personal because I felt like it was really important, like the messages that were being put out. Like that's why people like figures like Candace Owens or who would like kind of feed into that type of stuff. It was like, oh, this is so detrimental. But you just see it's different spaces. Like it's just like you kind of have to like shift your perspective towards like content creators who are focusing on the um the the figures who are spending their time focused on trying to fix things within the community, like better funding for like the schools and like some of the not so good areas in LA, people who are focused on that as opposed to like focusing on like that divisive type of talk, you know.
Exactly. And also when I meet people like you and we become friends, you see there's actually a lot of good people out there in the world.
Right.
It's a while to maybe find them through like a needle through the haystack. And you
Yeah,
go like, but it's the reminder of being like, you know what, there are some really good people in this world. And
for real, man.
and this and I'm so grateful for the friendship that we have. Our friends, like my friends are always like, I gotta meet Sam because you always talk about him. Because I think we just hung out so much. And then it's just as you meet more people, good people in your life, I think that's a huge reason why I can lean on you or you kind of lean on me whenever it's needed. But then you realize there's just still good people in the world and they exist. How many out there? I mean, essentially we'll just say everyone's good,
Yeah,
but everyone's like influenced in different ways. But if there's so many good people out there, then there is, for me at least, in my opinion, like there is hope. There is opportunity for connection.
yeah,
Um, there's like just a lot of possibilities.
yeah.
Yeah,
Completely agree. And
yeah,
that's one of the things that keeps you going too is the communities that you actually build. And it's a reminder not to live too much online, which is um kind of tough to do nowadays. You know, I'm so glad you introduced me to the Freedom app though. Like, even though I haven't used it as much as I should be using it, just knowing it's there, like, hey, when I need a break, I can like freeze myself off of these apps. But living in real life is a reminder, like, these are a lot of positive interactions that you're having. Like even with you, every time we hang out is good energy. We're able to discuss things like controversial topics without
blowing
becoming
up.
exactly, man. And that's a relief. It's a relief to be able to do that with the close friends, you know, who grew up different than you did, you know. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Sam, for being on my show. You will definitely, I'm sure people will hear more from you because I'll always have you on chatting and sharing your ideas or perspectives and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
No, thank you for having me on, giving me some time to speak about my story. I appreciate you.
And that's a wrap for today's episode, my friend. I hope you enjoyed Sam's story as much as I did. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, like right now, so you won't miss out on any episodes coming up. There are also more resources at thehappyhealingshop.com to help and support you on your spiritual journey. And until we meet again, my friend, always remember to shine your light brightly and to share your story, because you'll never know who it can help or inspire to create a change in their own world. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you soon.